Shan, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. Tell us in broad terms what laws there are in this country for tackling this issue of internet abuse and trolling.
There are very established laws to tackle this sort of abuse. You've effectively got two main pieces of legislation, the Malicious Communications Act and the Communications Act, that enables the prosecutorial authorities to take action against individuals if they send abusive messages over social media such as Twitter. And over the years, particularly recently, there have been a number of prosecutions using that legislation, the most recent of which was relating to Stella Creasy. And I think that this report highlights the need for that legislation to be used more and more to make examples of people when they do this sort of thing to try and persuade others from doing it.
But it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because isn't there a relatively fine line between what's offensive and not very pleasant and what's actually a crime?
Yes, I think the concept of free speech often gets mentioned in the context of looking at particular messages that are sent over social media. Offensive comments or criticism in itself, I don't think breaches the legislation. But what we're talking about here is out-and-out abuse. And I think that's the difference. And it's up to the authorities to decide which side of the line it falls. But I think that certainly this report highlights is what I believe to be clear cases of abuse as opposed to offensive or critical comments of the McCanns.
A lot of people will say we have freedom of speech in this country. I'm just expressing an opinion. What's your advice to those individuals to make sure they stay the right side of the law?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with expressing an opinion, and you're right, the right of free speech is a very important right in this country. But I think there's a very big difference between that and abuse. I think you can imagine yourself in a situation where the person is in front of you, maybe in a pub or somewhere else where you confront them in the street. And how would you approach that person if they were standing in front of you? If you're going to be abusive, and say something that's threatening over social media, then I think there is a good chance that you're going to fall foul of these laws, and you have to be very careful.
How seriously do police take claims of abuse?
I think some would say that they're not taking it seriously enough. I give the analogy if you were actually faced with someone on the street that abused you. I think in those circumstances it's far more likely that the police will take action than if you're abused over social media. I think there are a number of problems the police are facing. Firstly is resourcing issues. I think there's so much of this that's going on at the moment. I think the police have a resourcing issue. Secondly, quite often these messages are sent anonymously, and maybe also from jurisdictions that are outside the UK, which makes prosecutions much more difficult than a situation where this abuse is taking place in a face-to-face situation. But I personally think that there should be more that should be done by the police, and that we need more examples being made to prevent this thing happening again.
Well, yes, and to what extent in that case, you talk about examples, the case of Lord McAlpine, to what extent did that serve to educate people generally about what can and can't be said?
I think that episode was certainly helpful in educating people that you can't just say things without consequences on social media. But unfortunately, I think people have short memories, and quite often they forget these things, and they do it again. So I think the police have to constantly look at whether it's right that a prosecution should be brought, because I don't think you can have too many reminders to people not to do this sort of thing.
What about the social media websites themselves, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the other alternatives? Should they be doing more, do you think?
I think they're trying to do more. Certainly, they've got a complaint system, so if you receive or you observe abusive messages over their media, they will take action to take it down. I think they could be more prompt in doing that. What I don't agree with is certain calls for pre-moderation by these services, so that they will look at stuff before it is sent over their media. I mean, it would be like asking the telephone service to monitor and prevent abuse over the telephone lines. I think that would just be impractical. But I think there's more that social media services can do, and I think they're looking at it very closely. And I think they do have a role to play to try and minimise the abuse that is being sent over their media.
OK, well, Niri Shan, very interesting to hear from you today. Thanks very much indeed. You're watching Sky News. Do stay with us.